From Music Through Physics and Biology to Health Part 2, number 1551, VPT 104, February 26, 2026. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation, category, blood pressure autonomic regulation. Quantitative results, real-time condition, and 8-month post-stroke structural trend. The real-time measurements obtained on the morning of February 26, 2026 show a systolic blood pressure of 109 mmHg and a diastolic blood pressure of 66 mmHg, with a heart rate of 49 beats per minute. The derived hemodynamic parameters include a pulse pressure of 43 mmHg, a mean arterial pressure of 80 mmHg, a blood pressure spike of 4.8 mmHg, and a triggering sensitivity index C of 87.5. All values are below their respective safety thresholds. These instantaneous measurements taken on the morning after sleep with soft music represent the current operating condition of my vascular system, in structural terms. The applied load is well within the protected zone, the oscillation amplitude is small, and the rupture-triggering force is effectively suppressed. To evaluate whether this condition is an isolated event or a sustained structural state, the complete longitudinal dataset from 08-2025 through 02-2026 was analyzed. The 8-month averages are SBP equals 114.6 for mmHg, DBP equals 69.29 mmHg, HR equals 57.56 BPM, PP equals 45.3 for mmHg. MAP equals 84.4 mmHg, BP spike equals 13.75 mmHg, TSI equals 96.87. All average values remain at or below their respective threshold limits. More importantly, the TSI has been maintained below the structural safety boundary of 100 for the majority of the observation period, with only one temporary elevation in 11 to 1025ths at 100 to 0.17 greater than 100. The most significant protective feature is the reduction in the instantaneous blood pressure spike from the 8-month average of 13.75 mmHg to 4.8 mmHg on the measurement morning. With soft music listening, from a vascular mechanics perspective, baseline pressure represents the static load, whereas the spike represents the transient dynamic overload that can trigger structural failure. The current spike amplitude is approximately 1/3 of the longitudinal average, indicating effective damping of the hemodynamic oscillation. The monthly TSI data further confirm a sustained low-load regime, 08-2025 TSI 94.409-025 TSI 89.80 10 to 1025ths TSI 95.98 11 to 1025ths TSI 100 to 0.17. 12 to 1025ths TSI 98.2301 2026 TSI 94.570 to 2026 TSI 96.87. This pattern demonstrates that after a brief overload period, the system was brought back into the protected operating zone and has remained there. When viewed as a time-dependent structural system, these data indicate that the vascular network has been functioning under a sustained reduced load condition for 8 consecutive months. This is not a single favorable measurement but a maintained structural environment that allows preservation of the remaining safety margin. Physiological interpretation, autonomic damping and load reduction. On the measurement morning, the subject obtained an additional 2 hours of sleep while exposed to slow, harmonious music. This was followed by a low heart rate, reduced pulse pressure, minimal pressure spike, and a TSI deep within the safe zone. This sequence indicates parasympathetic dominance and suppression of sympathetic surge. In structural dynamics, this corresponds to an increase in damping, which reduces oscillation amplitude and peak stress. In biological terms, autonomic stabilization smooths the systolic pressure waveform and lowers the instantaneous mechanical load applied to the vascular wall. System-level conclusion. These findings provide direct real-time and longitudinal evidence that 1. TSI functions as an instantaneous structural load indicator. 2. Blood pressure spike amplitude is the dominant transient overload component. 3. Sustained maintenance of TSI below 100 corresponds to a protected vascular operating condition. 4. Autonomic modulation through non-pharmacological intervention can immediately reduce the rupture-triggering load. This represents active daily control of a time-dependent biological structure rather than passive observation of isolated clinical measurements. Future direction, methodological scalability, data continuity, and the role of sleep. This investigation is presented as an N=1 study because a complete, continuous, and internally consistent data set of this quality is currently available only from my own long-term self-monitoring. This does not represent a limitation of the methodology. The TSI is a normalized, dimensionless index derived from universally measurable hemodynamic variables, and the load-energy structure analytical framework is inherently applicable to any individual. The true constraint is the practical difficulty of obtaining high-resolution, long-duration, and behaviorally synchronized physiological data under a standardized protocol. In other words, the challenge isn't theoretical validity but data continuity and collection discipline. This study also demonstrates that sleep recovery is an integral component of real-time vascular load control, the additional 2.5 hours of deep and uninterrupted sleep in this case, facilitated by coherent and calming acoustic input, produced a clear autonomic shift toward parasympathetic dominance, reflected by a lower heart rate, reduced pressure variability, a marked lismolar blood pressure spike, and a TSI well within the structural safety zone. The observed reduction in rupture-triggering load is therefore the combined outcome of autonomic stabilization and improved sleep efficiency rather than the effect of a single isolated factor. As wearable sensors and mobile health platforms continue to advance, the acquisition of continuous personal datasets will become increasingly feasible when such data become available. This closed-loop, real-time load control methodology can be implemented in a broader patient population without modification of its core structure. Future work that simultaneously quantifies sleep quality, autonomic balance, and TSI dynamics will further establish an integrated non-pharmacological strategy for daily vascular protection in time-dependent biological systems. Conclusion: a musical tone is not only an artistic expression but also a structured physical energy input capable of modifying autonomic function and hemodynamic load. Through real-time TSI monitoring, I have demonstrated that coherent acoustic frequency can act as an pharmacological damping mechanism that lowers systolic pressure and reduces rupture risk of blood vessels. This finding establishes a direct connection between frequency domain physics, autonomic regulation, and structural vascular safety. It also proved as a practical daily tool for patients to control their hemodynamic load in real time. This is another example of how governing principles of load, energy, geometry, and time apply equally to mechanical structures and living biological systems. This case study clearly demonstrates the cause and effect relationship from music to blood pressure and ultimately to stroke risk. It integrates music, physics, medicine, and health into one coherent and measurable framework. Disclaimer: I write this paper not for fame, but to share what I have learned so others can understand their health, prevent disease, and live longer, healthier lives. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C. This content is provided for educational reference only and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this summary freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights for this article and its related materials belong to the author, Gerald C.